Good morning, fifth grade. So last week we finished off with lesson 1 of chapter 6, talking about the Articles of Confederation, but we didn't get to go over the pros and cons because it didn't record right for me. So I want to just talk a little bit to you about the pros of the Articles of Confederation and the cons, so the positives and the negatives. So starting off, one of the positive things, one of the pros, is that it established the first national government in the United States. So before this, we didn't have any type of overall government for all of the states. So now we have our first national government. All right, so the next thing that the Articles of Confederation did was that it created the Federation Congress to govern the nation. So it had a Congress that would help to govern the nation. The Articles of Confederation also allowed the states to run their own governments independently. So it gave the states a lot of power to create and run their own governments. All right, another pro was that it did not allow for taxes by the national government. So the states really like this and the citizens like this, so they didn't have to be taxed by the states and the federal government. They were only taxed by their states. So this was a pro in the Articles of Confederation for the citizens. They liked not having to pay too many taxes. All right, and lastly, we have that the Articles of Confederation enabled Congress to create the Northwest Ordinance. That was a positive thing, a pro, in order to help expand the United States. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of the cons. So one of the first cons was that the Articles of Confederation did not provide ways to help banks make sure loans were repaid. So it was difficult for banks to hold people accountable that took out loans and have them repay those loans. Another con was that even though we created the Federation Congress, the Confederation Congress did not have enough power to govern effectively. So a lot of the power was in the states and not in the federal government. So it was hard for that Confederation Congress to get anything done because they didn't have enough power to do anything effectively. Another con or negative to the Articles of Confederation was that some states created constitutions that went against the Articles. So they didn't work together, they actually butted heads. And the state constitution would say this, and the federal constitution would say this. So they didn't get along very well. So they went against the Articles of Confederation. All right, another con of the Articles of Confederation was that the states have their own currencies, making it hard for people to do business in more than one state. So each separate state had their own currency. So, for instance, if Illinois had one type of currency and Missouri had another type of currency, we're right next door to each other. If we went over to Missouri to buy something, we would have to exchange money or try to figure out what our money was worth to their money. So it made it really difficult for the states to do that. Now, in our day and age today, different countries have different currency and we know exchange rates for that. But this was really difficult to do in our one country. Each state had separate currencies. So that made it really difficult. All right. One of the last cons that we have for the Articles of Confederation, one of the negative things was that the national government's money problems led to violent conflicts such as Shays' Rebellion. So we talked a little bit about how the national government didn't allow for taxes. So that was good for the citizens, but not good for the national government. And so because they had issues with money and collecting taxes, it led to different violent conflicts such as Shays' Rebellion. All right, so let's go ahead and continue now with Chapter 6, Lesson 2. All right, so we're going to go ahead and look at our chapter outcomes, or lesson outcomes for this lesson. So let's go ahead and get started on this. So it says, how does the Constitution set up our government framework? So we're going to look at how the Constitution sets up all of our, how our laws are made, things like that. So the framework of the Constitution. So lesson outcomes, it says, what am I learning? In this lesson, you are going to use your investigative skills to explore the writing of the U.S. Constitution. Why am I learning it? Well, reading and talking about the writing of our Constitution will help you understand our government, its laws, and the ideas behind the laws. And so, how will I know that I learned it? You will be able to explain the structure of our government and the reasons for this structure. So, let's go ahead and get started on lesson 2. We're going to go ahead and look at the primary source on the next page, but here's what you're going to do while we read it. It says, find details. Read the letter from George Washington to the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, John Jay. How do they feel about the Articles of Confederation? So we're going to see how John Jay and George Washington feel about the Articles of Confederation. All right, so we have a primary source. This is a letter to John Jay from George Washington, May 18th of 1786. It says, I coincide perfectly in sentiment with you, my dear sir, that there are errors in our national government which call for correction loudly. I would add, but I shall find myself happily mistaken if the remedies are at hand. That it is necessary to revise and amend the Articles of Confederation, I entertain no doubt, but what may be the consequences of such an attempt is doubtful. Yet something must be done, or the fabric must fall. It certainly is tottering. So, again, the question on this was, how do they feel about the Articles of Confederation? So how do you think John Jay and George Washington feel about the Articles of Confederation? All right, now that you've given your opinion on how they feel, let's talk about it a little bit. It says, my dear sir, there are errors in our national government which call for correction. So you can clearly see that George Washington is saying, now there's errors, there's something wrong in our Articles of Confederation which need correction or need to be fixed. All right, continuing on down this way, I entertain no doubt, he's saying there's no doubt that if we don't do this, there's going to be consequences. Yet something must be done or the fabric must fall. So it's saying something must be done or the Articles of Confederation are not going to hold up what the country stands for. And it says it certainly is tottering, meaning that it certainly is wavering and it's going to crash if something's not done about the Articles. All right, so one of the first things I want to look at in lesson 2 is this infographic, a comparison of the 3 plans. There are going to be 3 different plans that come about on how they want the Constitution to look. So we're going to look at these just to kind of give us some background info. So when we go back and read it, it kind of will make a little more sense to us. So a comparison of the 3 plans. So those are New Jersey plan, the Virginia plan, and then the Great Compromise. So the New Jersey plan appealed to the smaller states. It had a 1-part legislature. Each state would get 1 representative in the legislature. Then we have the Virginia plan, which appealed to the larger states. So it had a 2-part legislature. A lower house would be elected by voters, and an upper house would be elected by the lower house. And then the number of representatives in the houses would be based on the number of people in each state. So that's why the larger states like this, because they would get more votes, more representation, whereas the smaller states with smaller population wouldn't get as many votes. So now let's look at the compromise. What is a compromise? Well, it's taking some things from both sides and putting them together, and we're compromising on them. So let's look at a Great Compromise. So the Great Compromise, it has a 2-part legislature. So for instance, we have the House of Representatives and then we have the Senate. So that's a 2-part legislature. The number of delegates in the House of Representatives would be determined by the population of each state. So that's kind of what the Virginia plan had. And then the Senate would have 2 delegates from each state. So it kind of talks about what the New Jersey plan had, where each had the same amount of representation. And so it's still the same way today. There's the House of Representatives is based on your population in your state, and the Senate, each state has 2 senators from each state. All right. And then lastly, it says a law would not be approved until it was passed through both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And that is still true today. Okay. So that is the compromise about the plan for legislator or legislation in the Constitution.